had them on long before I dialed up. How they came and they on top and I'm a mile up. I had them on long before I dialed up. How they came and they on top and I'm a mile up. I know the wall's closing in, but don't you dare give up now. Poe believed in me, pull up through some bucks down. Todd told the valet pull the truck round. Push the line after we drew it, it's just us now. Would you believe me if I told you my granny told me she prayed this? Then booked the surgery just to pull me out of the basement. Right back where I started, nothing to show for a facelift. Got pushed playing Walter White and Davis, never felt so dangerous. The type of power they can't quantify. And name the best from my region, you gotta utter mine. Think of who really putting on, you never come to mind. Rapping like your Spotify, tap you rappers compromise. Yeah, no need to panic, just paint the canvas. If you can feel the static, you're too close, find your balance. Embed the revolution for they prohibition bandwidth. Blood trickle from the leaders he was planning. I had them all line before I dialed up. How they came and they on top and I'm a mile up. I had them all line before I dialed up. How they came and they on top and I'm a mile up. Bought at that flight to Amsterdam. When my accountant and minus my family found out you and didn't like it. Not in the salon with Dale said and I thought he was biased. Then I got a demo that said copy the finest. Before my foolishness settled in, recorded a whole tape before we got to Berlin. This close to giving up and now never again. Don't overlook the work and come expecting to win. In the end, my word, never put nothing over the squad. Got it right up under their nose and provide a facade. Off the cliff with broken wings, I'm aware of the odds. Enough faith for us all, I'm the one for the job. Most days, catching sun rays, baby, look like the front page. Overthinking what they might say, have it your way. Yeah, the biggest threat is something they never seen. Dial it up, patch me into the screen. I had them all line before I dial up. How they came and they on top and I'm a mile up. I had them all line before I dial up.
Peace, land, and bread, my friends. Welcome to another episode of Live in Luqman Nation, the most dangerous show on social media, on the most dangerous platform on social media, Black Power Media. This is Jacquie Luqman. Thank you so much for joining me on our regular Friday evening show. And tonight it is Blackonomically speaking with our guest and friend, Dr. Linwood Tauheed. But before I bring him on, let's do some housekeeping. Remember, folks, if you are watching and you are not a member of Black Power Media on YouTube, you can join Black Power Media. You can subscribe and join Black Power Media. Remember to click the bell to get the notifications for when anyone and everyone goes live or uploads content on this channel. There's lots and lots to choose from. Always, always something interesting, thought-provoking, entertaining to watch. You can also support Black Power Media on Patreon at patreon.com/Black Power Media. And you can also support Luqman Nation on Patreon, patreon.com/Luqman Nation, LuqMannation. We really, really appreciate your support. And without further ado, I welcome our guest and friend, Dr. Linwood Tauheed. Thank you so very much, Dr. Tauheed, for joining us again a week late of our usual third Friday date, but I was in Venezuela.
Yes.
And a lot still I still don't think I've gotten enough sleep from being in Venezuela for a week, but that's okay. I'm going to turn right around and go to Cuba at the end of the month. And it looks like we've lost Dr. Tauheed momentarily, but he'll be back on in a bit, I'm sure. So, all right, there we go.
You lost my camera just for a second.
Okay, no problem. No worries at all. So, we've got a lot to cover. Because apparently, Dr. Tauheed, while I was away, I guess Wells Fargo has been up to some shenanigans again. So I'm going to share this article for folks to see. Oh, where did it go? There it is. Apparently, Wells Fargo is being accused once again of racial discrimination. And I have opinions about Ben Crump, but this time I'm going to withhold my opinions because he is involved in this class action lawsuit against Wells Fargo, which is again facing scrutiny and lawsuits over loan practices involving Black borrowers. They are the subject of a class action lawsuit as well as criticism from Capitol Hill over claims that it has denied Black people a shot at home ownership again. Um, and this is where Ben Crump comes in. He joined an amended complaint that was filed Thursday. This was just last week in federal court in San Francisco against Wells Fargo. He says, "We are suing Wells Fargo to demand they change their practices that are killing Black homeowners opportunities," with an exclamation point at the end. Um, and he tweeted that last month, and let me see what the date on this tweet was. April 14th, he tweeted, "Last month it was reported that Wells Fargo approved only 47% of Black homeowners' mortgage applications compared to 72% of white applicants. We are suing Wells Fargo to demand they change their practices that are killing Black homeowners' opportunities." And I just want to remind folks as I go down uh, to the article to remind people that Wells Fargo settled in 2012 for $184 million in fines, paid in fines $184 million to the Department of Justice over allegations that they steered qualified Black and Hispanic borrowers to subprime mortgages. They absolutely did that, and they paid that $184 million fine. Then 4 years later, in 2016, they were in the center of another scandal that cost the CEO his job, along with 5,000 other employees. They were fined nearly 200 million for illegally opening millions of phony deposit and credit card accounts. And then 2 years after that, in 2018, Wells Fargo was fined more than $1 billion to settle federal charges into consumer abuses related to its auto lending and mortgage business. Dr. Tauheed, honestly, at this point, I don't understand why anybody Black or Latinx still has an account with Wells Fargo. And it boggles my mind that they're still actually in operation. So what are your thoughts about these latest um, uh, allegations against the mortgage company, the giant?
yeah, Wells Fargo is a consistent bad actor in this process. Now there are other bad actors as well, but Wells Fargo seems to be the top of the heap in terms of bad acting. You mentioned, of course, the phony accounts that Wells Fargo had set up and paid a fine and went to an agreement that they would stop those, and then they did it again. They were fined again in that process. Now the process that Wells Fargo was engaged in terms of steering borrowers into subprime lending is not just a Wells Fargo problem, right? All the major banks and mortgage companies were involved in that process. Part of that process led to the 2008 financial crisis. But just to clear things up, it's reported that the common wisdom, the conventional wisdom, is that it was the subprime mortgage holders not being able to pay their mortgages that led to the financial crisis, and that's incorrect. That's the financial institution blaming Black and Latinx Latino borrowers for the crisis, when in fact it was the fraud that those financial institutions were engaged in with mortgage-backed securities that led to the collapse of the financial system. And then they were bailed out to the tune of, I'm going to tell you this figure, $29 trillion. I don't know if we said this before. It was reported that the amount was 9 trillion in terms of the bailout to financial institutions over the crisis. But we had some students here at the University of Missouri, Kansas City at UMKC who at the time did some very in-depth investigations into Federal Reserve Bank operations and calculated a $29 trillion bailout for them. At least 20 billion dollars of the bailout was hidden. Excuse me, I said 29 billion. I mean 29 trillion. 29
29
trillion.
when
What was reported was 9 trillion. And so what the Federal Reserve did was set up what they call special facilities by
uh-huh.
which financial institutions could borrow money, and then with the idea that they would pay them back, but there was near zero interest loans. And so you had financial institutions that were borrowing money, investing it, and then of course we'll pay the interest back, and eventually maybe we'll pay the loans back. But it came to $29 trillion. Now here's something that's interesting. When you go back and you look at the total amount number of mortgages in the country, that is mortgages representing housing, there
Okay.
was only $7 trillion in total mortgages in the country. All the mortgages that were outstanding in the country totaled $7 trillion. But there was a type of financial derivative called a collateralized debt obligation, which is a fancy way of saying, well, it was kind of supposed to be a type of insurance policy where if people defaulted on their mortgage-backed securities, meaning underneath that people were defaulting on their mortgages, the holders of those mortgage-backed securities would still be paid, right? And AIG, for example, was a big producer of these collateralized debt obligations, these so-called insurance policies. Now, there were $7 trillion in mortgages, and there was $41 trillion in collateralized debt obligations. Now, understand, when you have an insurance policy on your home, the value of your insurance policy, your homeowner's insurance, is equal to the value of your
Value of your home. Right.
the rebuild value.
Mm-hmm.
If your neighbor could take out insurance on your home, then now the amount of insurance out there is double the amount of your home. What a collateralized debt obligation allowed people who didn't own the property to do, who didn't own the mortgage-backed security, to take out a collateralized debt obligation with a company like AIG. They paid a premium with the idea that, of course, AIG, if there's no defaults, AIG makes money from the premiums. But when the defaults began to come in at a 6 to 1 ratio, 7 to $41 trillion, AIG didn't have enough money to pay. And so that's why Lehman Brothers went under, and that was money that flowed out of the Federal Reserve Bank into AIG, so they could pay off financial institutions like Goldman Sachs and others, who had the insurance policies, but also owned the mortgage-backed securities. None of that has very little to do with Black and Latino folks who had subprime mortgages, who couldn't pay their mortgages, right? This was escalated. It was expanded by the fraud that was going on with financial institutions behind the scenes in their mortgage-backed securities. Now, so
Wow.
Wells Fargo was part of that process. They were a loan originator, which means that you go to Wells Fargo to borrow money.
Mm-hmm.
But Wells Fargo then sold those loans off to financial institutions, and they become part of mortgage-backed securities. So for a loan originator, who passes that loan on, it doesn't really matter if the borrower defaults or not because they've gotten their money, right?
Wow.
And so Wells Fargo, like many of these banks that have mortgages, are not the final holders of these mortgages. They become mortgage-backed securities that get sold off to the Goldman Sachs and the Morgan Stanleys, and some of them are banks as well that are able to borrow that $29 trillion from the Federal Reserve Bank. So when you say banks borrowing, we're including financial institutions that used to be just financial partnerships. Goldman Sachs used to be just a partnership among people who invested. But when Glass-Steagall, the Glass-Steagall Act was repealed in 1998 under the Clinton administration, they could become banks, and by being banks, they could borrow from the Federal Reserve, which is what they did to float them through the crisis. And then since then, of course, since the 2008 crisis, we've had this quantitative easing,
Mm-hmm.
this
Mm-hmm.
buying of securities by the Federal Reserve. And so you have essentially the Federal Reserve can buy anything. And in many cases, they were buying junk bonds at face value. So here's a bond or a security that's a package of securities that's worth $1 billion on paper.
Mm-hmm.
That's only worth 1/10 of that, 100
Oh,
million, and the Fed will buy that for $1 billion.
oh wow.
And so you can't lose if you're in that business. If you make a bad loan, the Fed will just make it up and buy
Wow.
it from you. Now that process is quote ending because we're in a time when the Fed wants to turn to fighting inflation, which is its own problem that we can talk about. But since the 2008 crisis, financial institutions have been able to pull more and more money out of the Federal Reserve, which kind of goes unnoticed because it's not part of the federal budget. It's behind the scenes, so it
Wow.
goes largely unnoticed. This thing about Wells Fargo, though, is I mean they're a small part of this. They're just a continuous bad actor that continues to get caught. Others don't get caught, or when they get caught, they don't make the news as much because they don't continue to do these kind of outrageous things.
I mean, and and the thing they get caught doing, Dr. Tauheed, it's just how do you justify, and I'm not asking you this because I think you have the answer. This is a completely rhetorical question that just how does any financial institution justify denying loan applications, mortgage applications for half of the population
Hmm.
of one particular or two particular demographics, in this case,
Hmm.
Black and Latinx borrowers, but approving almost all of the loan applications
Hmm.
of another demographic, and that's
Yeah,
white people. Because
yeah.
when when regular folks hear that um, those numbers, that
Hmm.
47% of Black homeowners mortgage applications were approved rather,
Yeah.
compared to 72% of white applicants, people
Hmm.
will come up with all kinds of excuses like, well, more black people have bad credit, more black
Hmm.
people have low income, they really more fewer black people could qualify for Wells Fargo's mortgage qualifications than white
Hmm.
people.
Hmm.
But my counter to that is, you mean to tell me almost every single white person that applied for a mortgage in Wells Fargo had 900 plus credit and had
Hmm.
six figure? Nah, no, I don't believe that for a second. But
Yeah,
that's
when you compare applicants for the same characteristics, that is, in the same income, the same education, same occupational status groups, same credit scores, black folks are denied mortgages at a higher rate than white mortgages. And you could one of the responses was that black folks are buying houses or wanting to buy houses in neighborhoods that are higher risk. But when you then compare black folks who are wanting to buy houses in white neighborhoods with the same income, same education, same credit scores, black folks are also turned down at a higher rate. This is institutionalized racism. you can go through the process of having a computer score your applicants' characteristics. And if in that algorithm there is nothing about the race of the person, then you get an equal scoring. But
Mm-hmm.
if something in that is an indication of the race of the person, so for example, they live in a certain zip code, that gives you an indication of that the probability that they might be of a certain race, and the algorithm will downscore them as not as reliable, even though they have a history of being as reliable, can pay. They might not be as reliable as a white applicant. And so what we have is institutionalized racism now digitized in the process of algorithms, in artificial intelligence and machine learning algorithms. And we know those
Wow.
algorithms are biased as society's way of thinking about various groups is, because those algorithms are in the process of building them. They learn how the creators of those algorithms think, and they put those into automation. And so you can compare apples to apples, and you end up with black folks having a lower opportunity to buy homes than whites. Right now, well, as of recent, the home ownership rate in the white community is about 72, 73%. And in the black community, black home ownership rate is about 30 points lower than that, at about 42%. And of course, if this process continues on as Wells Fargo has done, and other mortgage lenders go, that those numbers will continue to be what those numbers are. And so
Mm-hmm.
this is not a new phenomenon. This is an old phenomenon.
So this is an interesting point made in the chat, and I think I hear this a lot from people who believe that there is something we can do to ameliorate what you're explaining
Hmm.
as, digitized discrimination that doesn't have, you know, a bigoted loan officer,
Hmm.
right, sitting behind a desk
May or
looking
may
at an
not.
app.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's literally an algorithm that
Hmm.
is looking at factors that might not seem racial to
Hmm.
us,
Hmm.
but the way the algorithm is developed, it is
Hmm.
racial
Yeah.
to
As,
downscore. So is there a way for us to beat the system at its own game? Is there a way for us to ameliorate what is done to put us in this position where we are denied opportunity, even if all factors are on paper equal except for our race?
yeah. I was in the software development business before I became an economist. I have a degree in computer science, and I did that work for 20 years. And so I know how these programs work. They do what the programmers want them to do. It's not a computer mistake. They're doing exactly what they were designed to do. So if you want these kinds of outcomes not to happen, you have to write programs that don't do this. I mean, it's very simple. And so I mentioned zip code. Zip code is not a one-to-one correlation between persons living in a certain zip code being black and no, but it's a high probability that you can determine the race of a person or the ethnicity by the zip codes that they live in. If you don't include zip codes in the algorithm doesn't have that point of reference to calculate a credit score or and of course it's in the credit scores as well. It's not just in your mortgage application algorithm. Your credit scores are also taking into account your zip code. Your insurance company rates for your auto insurance and for your homeowners insurance is taking in these zip codes. Zip code is so highly correlated with race that these zip codes need to be out of these algorithms,
Wow.
and other things that are highly correlated with race, like there's even an indication, well, not indication, there's certainly studies about names, about
Hmm.
certain names are more prevalent with certain groups of ethnic and racial groups than others. These if these applications were blind, without name, without zip code, without where you went to high school, without all these other identify. What's important for a mortgage application is your past payment history and whether you have enough income to pay the mortgage.
Hmm.
Pretty much everything else is irrelevant. And if you had an algorithm that just had that, then we would find that black folks would be able to get mortgages at a higher rate. Now, are we ever going to be in the aggregate? Not ever. Are we? Would we be in the aggregate as high as white folks who have an average higher income and therefore are able to pay their bills at a higher rate? That's something else to work on in terms of equalizing income and wealth. But part of the process, of course, of building wealth is home ownership. And so this is not a one-way relationship. Your home ownership builds your wealth, and your wealth allows you to buy homes. So this is a
Right.
reciprocal relationship. And so it says CDR, it's really messed up with the formula. Credit scores are private. Yeah, yeah. These things are institutionalized. They are
Mm,
connected. They are networked together in a way that I would argue were intended to disadvantage black folks. Intended. This wasn't, accidental. And then, of course, then when they continue on, it doesn't matter whether the loan officer is a racist or not, or intends. The algorithm tells them what they should be doing.
wow. Mm. So, do you see another hefty fine for Wells Fargo in the future? And I think I should ask Dr. Tauheed. Wells Fargo's paid a lot of fines.
Mhm.
Where does that money go?
Well, the fines paid to the federal government go to the federal government. Now, with this lawsuit,
You mean
if
that money
they
doesn't go to the people they ripped off?
well, no, it doesn't go there. Um, uh, but with this lawsuit, with this private lawsuit, were it to prevail, then and Wells Fargo is made to pay a fine, that that money should go into a fund to support housing purchases by persons in the black community, by black folks.
Mm,
They paid billion-dollar fines. Now, in this world of $1 trillion and so forth, $1 billion is not a lot of money. So it
yeah.
needs to be it needs to be a substantial fine. Otherwise, Wells Fargo will say that's just a cost of doing business, and they go on and continue to do what they've been doing.
Yeah, which they seem to have done at least four times
Right.
now.
Yeah.
So, all right. So, Dr. Tawheed, I almost don't like talking about this subject because people
Mm.
are terribly passionate about cryptocurrency, and they swear that we who do not see cryptocurrency as the revolution for black folks just don't understand
Yeah.
cryptocurrency. And I have to admit, I do not entirely understand the whole blockchain concept. I don't. I admit I don't. But I do know
Mhm.
that anytime cryptocurrency is um it is traded like a stock,
Mhm.
you invest in it like a stock,
Mhm.
and the value of the cryptocurrency depends on are how many people purchase shares of the
Mhm.
that sounds like plain old capitalism to me, and that don't sound like revolution. But I a lot of people, Dr. Tawheed, I'm going to share this article with folks. A lot of people don't agree. They believe that because a few people have done very well with cryptocurrency, that we should take heed and listen to them. And we talked about this a little bit on the morning show
Mhm.
earlier this week. But this article came out on the 19th on MSNBC. And Jared Ball, our own Dr. Jared Ball, is quoted in this article. And there are various viewpoints in this article. There's someone there. They speak to someone called Tremaine Lee, um, who is a advocate of cryptocurrency, being an answer for unbanked Black and Latinx people, like people who can't. don't have enough money to get a bank account,
Mm-hmm.
can't get approved for a bank account,
Mm-hmm.
cryptocurrency is the answer for them. Then let's see, they mention the celebrities who are now marketing cryptocurrency to a black market. Megan the Stallion. They talk about Spike Lee. They talk about LeBron James. And his all of those advertisements. And then they quote Dr. Ball when he says that the idea that this is a pathway, this being cryptocurrency, is a pathway towards Black liberation or the liberation of any other community is an extension. It's a rebranding of an old Black capitalist mythology. He goes on to say, and they actually do quote him quite a bit in this article, which I read that first little part and I was like, oh Lord, I hope that's not all that they quoted him in saying. And this is a pretty in-depth article.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but Dr. Ball said, uh, in response to this person, Tremaine Lee, saying that the numbers show that Black people are getting into crypto at a higher rate than white people. That's the stat we already mentioned, that 23% of Black Americans own cryptocurrency compared to 11% of white Americans.
Mm-hmm.
And another poll found that Black Americans were more likely to say the decentralized nature of crypto was positive.
Mm-hmm.
Lamar thinks that's great, but others are saying, hold up a minute. And people like Dr. Jared Ball, and they quote Dr. Ball as saying, this is not because Black people are on the cutting edge, the fact that so many, 23% of Black people own cryptocurrency. He said, this is because Black people have a level of marketing that is targeting them that whites don't. And then most white investors also have a wider array of options in their portfolio. They have money to invest in different places, at different spaces. So I really want to know what your opinion, first of all, on cryptocurrency in general is, Dr. Tauheed, but also I'm very curious to hear what you have to say about this idea of cryptocurrency being the answer for unbanked people in
Mm-hmm.
particular.
Mm-hmm.
So, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, let me say this, very very upfront, and so that no one will misunderstand what I'm about to say. Cryptocurrency is a Ponzi scheme. It is it is it is a fraudulent operation.
Mm. Ooh,
Okay, now
I
I,
wasn't
I say
expecting that smoke. I gotta admit.
I say that as a former programmer and as an economist who was trained and teach at a school that's very much involved in a discussion of what we call modern monetary theory.
Hmm.
Now there's a dictum, if you will, among modern monetary theorists with regard to money. Anyone can create money. The problem is getting people to accept it. Now, just because anyone can create, quote, money, doesn't mean that the money that's created is a valuable thing. What money is an IOU. And from people who have a history of giving IOUs and paying those IOUs back, they've developed a process of trust. I borrow some money from you, I give you my IOU, then I come back later and you want me to pay my bill back, I pay you back. So I've built up some trust. We have no evidence, no history of how a Bitcoin will eventually be settled because it's not worth anything other than other Bitcoins, right? I
Hmm.
mean, a dollar is worth something because I can go to the store and when things are priced at a dollar, I can get that. I can exchange my dollar for that thing. Ultimately, all of this goes back to um, tangible assets that that our money is a representation of. It's not the real thing. It's a representation of it. Just had a discussion about the Wells Fargo and mortgage-backed securities and the fact that there was $7 trillion of mortgages
Mm-hmm.
and $41 trillion in insurance on those mortgages. Now, it's only possible for there to be $7 trillion of insurance on $7 trillion worth of mortgages. So the other $33 trillion was fictitious capital. It didn't represent anything.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you get to a Bitcoin, and today your Bitcoin is worth $1, and tomorrow your Bitcoin is worth $2, where'd the extra dollar come from? What value was created for you or anyone else that made that Bitcoin worth another dollar? And the only thing that happened was somebody else bought some more Bitcoins, and so the value of your Bitcoin went up. But one of the problems is, and you mentioned various celebrities. Celebrities have lots of money. And so when celebrities get into Bitcoin, the value of Bitcoin goes up
Oh.
because the demand for Bitcoin goes up. And so if I were a person who had lots of money and was intending to engage in a Ponzi scheme, I take a lot of money, I would buy into Bitcoin, and then when the value of Bitcoin goes up, I'd sell it and I'd take that money away. Well, where did that money come from? It didn't just come from anywhere. It came from people who bought those Bitcoins as the price was going up. Their money went into the Bitcoin vault and then came out to me as I converted that into dollars. Now, if we think that people are not going to take advantage of this problem in these kinds of currencies to make themselves rich, we're fooling ourselves. This is, as you said, capitalism. And it's even the worst kind of capitalism. It's financial capitalism. It's not industrial capitalism.
Oh, wow.
Industrial capitalism at least has the virtue of taking money to make something, make a product that sells for more money. This is the Marx fundamental equation of capitalism, and Marx got it right that this is what's at the heart of capitalism: the desire to make more money. But what the financial institutions have discovered how to do is to take money, and from that money make more money without making anything product in the middle. And that's all a Bitcoin or a cryptocurrency is. It's an opportunity for people to take money and then walk away with more money because that additional money has come from people who have gotten into the Ponzi scheme too late or didn't leave when they should have.
Oof.
And so every Ponzi scheme has a situation where the people who are in first are in at the beginning,
Mm-hmm.
and when they cash out, the whole scheme collapses because there's not enough money to pay everyone in the process. So you've got Bitcoins now. I don't know what the value of Bitcoins start out at $1. Now they're $30,000 or some of Bitcoin.
Mm-hmm.
What does that extra $30,000 represent? It doesn't represent anything real in the world.
Wow.
And I know many of us who are in the liberation sphere, the Black liberation sphere, in that area, are thinking of cryptocurrency as a way to get away from the U.S. government and the Federal Reserve Bank and the monetary system that's controlled by them. But why would I want to come out of that system and go into a system that's controlled by the Winklevoss twins, who were heavy investors in Bitcoin, or Elon Musk and Dogecoin and so forth?
Mm-hmm.
Why would I want to put them in control of my future just to replace it with the federal government? And so, for example, an answer to what would be the solution for persons who are unbanked would be a postal bank. A bank is a solution for people who are unbanked.
There we go.
You create a bank account for them at a place that at least has regulations about how a bank should run. And if the bank goes insolvent, there's an insurance policy. The federal government pays the amount of my deposit to me. as opposed to what happens almost every day is somebody goes in and hacks into one of these cryptocurrencies and pulls money out, and it just the Bitcoin at least disappears. um, but it was never really tangible anyway. I mean, the only tangibility it has is that someone is willing to tell you something with bitcoins, and you have bitcoins now. You can do that, but when they get that bitcoin, what do they do with the bitcoins? I mean, they can't go down to the grocery store and buy a loaf of bread with bitcoins.
Wow.
So it remains in the financial system until it collapses.
Mm.
And so anyone can create money, and the Bitcoin and the cryptocurrency people are making money. And right now they're getting people to take it,
Hmm.
to accept it. But
Hmm.
accepting it doesn't mean that it's worth anything. People are scammed all the time, buying things that aren't worth what they pay for them.
I mean, I gotta be honest. I really was not prepared for that smoke. I was just.
And I know lots of smart people dedicated to black upliftment and so forth who are into Bitcoin or cryptocurrency. I think it's an emotional thing for them. We got to get away from the federal government, so we got to get away from federal government money.
Mhm.
But I don't want to go into private money with people who only want to make a profit.
Yeah, yeah,
At least the federal government doesn't have to make a profit.
yeah. That's true, and especially when we see the way some of these new Bitcoin millionaires or
Mm-hmm.
some folks that are thousandaires are doing things like buying up property in Puerto Rico, which is continually denied independence and self determination. The Supreme Court actually just ruled today to
Mm-hmm.
deny residents of Puerto Rico federal Social Security benefits.
Mm-hmm.
It just it
Yeah.
just boggles my mind. So these new Bitcoin rich people are going to Puerto Rico, buying up all of this cheap property and
Mm.
turning property that was made cheap by U.S. imperialism, by the way,
Yes. Right.
and buying up this property
Mm-hmm.
and making the place unlivable for the people
Mm.
who for the Boricuans who that's their
Yeah.
yeah, it's a whole mess. But you mentioned MMT, and I what is MMT? And what are your thoughts on MMT? Because I feel that this was my response to cryptocurrency several years ago when I first heard about it, when it first became a thing and it started being talked about in the uh, leftist circles, the progressive leftist circles, that this is the tool for revolution. All you need is a computer, and that's powerful enough to mine Bitcoin. That was something that I still can't
Mm.
quite get my head around that one, but I do understand now that mining Bitcoin leaves an incredibly damaging ecological footprint. It is
Right. Yeah.
disastrous for the environment. That's that. But then I got into arguments with people about how any financial institution that relies on capitalism is not a tool for revolution. If you can make money and use that money to fund this thing or that thing, cool, dope. But relying building a revolutionary state on the capitalist system, that's not that's not the thing. And I felt like that conversation was always had in conjunction with MMT, modern
Mm.
monetary theory.
Mm-hmm.
And I always felt like people who espoused MMT explained MMT the way they explained cryptocurrency,
Mm.
so that people never really understood what either of them were, and they didn't get the nuances or the real meaning or the real life implications
Mm-hmm.
of what either thing really is. So, what is modern monetary theory? What is it in reality? And I mean, is there validity to it? Can it be used to change? the capitalist system as it exists?
Well, modern monetary theory. First of all, let's start with something that may be a little confusing. Modern monetary theory is not a theory. It is actually not well named. Now, the major researchers over the past 25 years in modern monetary theory were at my university, and I have written papers with them. And so when I say modern monetary theory should not be called modern monetary theory, it's misnamed. What modern monetary theory is not is it's not a theory. It is a description.
Mm.
It is a description of how money works in the current system. It's not connected to capitalism. It is modern. When it says modern monetary theory, we're talking about how money has worked over the last 5,000 years. So
Okay.
so the name modern monetary theory is a bad name for a number of reasons. It's a description, and what it says is this: any country that creates its own currency, as the US is, but not all countries in the world can independently create their own currency. But any country that can create its own currency can finance its own development as long as it has the resources to do so. So development is not a matter of money. Development is a matter of resources,
Right.
of land, labor, and capital. Capital are resources as well. And if you have enough of that, you can do whatever you need to do to develop, whatever you can do, whatever you know how to do. And money is not a constraint because you can always finance that process. So, for example, in a country that can create its own currency, and you have people who are unemployed, and you have piles of lumber, and you have no houses, well, you need to put those people to work, cutting down the lumber, turning down the trees, turning into lumber to build houses. Now, the fact that you might have to finance that, you have to pay labor, you have to pay the owners of lumber, but let's make it simple. Let's say the lumber is owned by the people, so you don't have to pay them. You have to pay labor because they have to take that and they have to go buy their bread and
Right.
so forth and so on. Well, there's no limit to there's no restriction on being able to pay them. A country that can make money can simply create enough money to pay them, to put them to work, to build houses. If they didn't have the lumber, they'd be constrained. It wouldn't matter how much money you had. So there's a saying that I'd rather be in a time of bread with no money than in a time of money with no bread. Money doesn't do anything. All money does is kind of allow the resources that you have to be used. If you don't have enough money, you can't you can't activate the resources that you have. And so what modern monetary theory argues again is that, for example, the US government or any government in a state of unemployment, if they have the resources, they can finance their employment. They can finance production. And so again, that's a description of what money can do in a community, in a society. It's not a theory. It's a description, right? In that sense. What that means, for example, for liberation, our discussion here, is that if you are Senegal, the country of Senegal, and your currency is the CFA franc, right, which used to be CFA used to be called the colonial franc of Africa, right? It was the currency that the French put into Senegal to motivate people to use the resources of Senegal for the benefit of the French. And then we have the liberation of Senegal, and they kept the currency, right? And so the Senegalese currency is pegged, what we call pegged to the French currency. And so the Senegal Bank of Senegal cannot create one new CFA if the Bank of France says no.
Wow.
So it's the Bank of France that's in control of the currency in Senegal. That means that if the Senegalese people have labor and they have resources and all, they can't overcome their unemployment issue unless they get permission from France to create money to do that process. The U.S. is what is called a sovereign currency producer. It can produce as much money as it wants to. But
Mm-hmm.
many countries in this world, and particularly former colonies of European countries, are not sovereign. They have to actually ask permission to create money in order to move forward. So MMT says something about that too. It says
Mm.
that those countries, if they want to develop, they need to disentangle their currency away from the colonial currencies. So that's a use of a description of how money works. Another good example of the problem with having currencies that your country doesn't control is the European Union as itself, the monetary union.
Mm-hmm.
Because these different countries got rid of their individual currencies
Right.
and adopted the euro.
Right.
The euro is essentially controlled by the German government and the government of France. They're the big powers in that. The UK was never part of even though it was part of the European Union, it maintained the pound. So it never became a euro dominated country. And so, for example, when Greece began to have its problems and unemployment and so forth, the Greeks, who before could have created drachma to put their people back to work, couldn't create another euro to put people back to work because the European Central Bank said no more euros for you. You're already in debt and so
Wow.
forth. And so they were not able to solve their internal unemployment problem because they were not in control of their money. Now, if we go to a cryptocurrency thing, people are saying that cryptocurrency will allow our community to be in control of our money. The problem is you have major investors who are in control of those cryptocurrencies.
Mm-hmm.
Why would I create a currency that's in the control of some celebrity? I love LeBron James, but I don't want LeBron James to be able to increase or decrease the value of some cryptocurrency because he buys or sells big portions. Elon Musk, not that long ago, caused the Dogecoin
Yep.
cryptocurrency
Mm-hmm.
to fall because he sold them,
Because he
and they
sold it. He literally
and
cashed it out and took everybody's money.
yeah, he cashed out. He cashed out when it was high, took
Mm-hmm.
everybody's money. It dropped, and then he bought it back in, right? And so, but that's the way you make money in capitalism. You can either buy low and sell high, or sell high and buy low.
Oh my God.
Either way, you make a lot of money. And so these cryptocurrencies are places where people who have lots of money are intending to make lots of money. And Bitcoin was the first of these, and the creator of Bitcoin, we don't know. Supposedly, we don't know who that is. I think his name is Sadeo Watanabe or something like that. We don't know who he is, but when he created Bitcoin, he reserved a certain amount, thousands of Bitcoin for himself. So you're starting this currency, and you're saying, I have 10,000 of these, and as the value of that goes up, he
Mm-hmm.
becomes wealthy in
Wow.
Bitcoin. And if he begins to sell it off, then he can turn his Bitcoin into money, into real money. Another
Wow.
way of thinking about Bitcoin, I say it was a Ponzi scheme. Another way of thinking about Bitcoin is monopoly money.
Ooh.
Anyone can create money, and people play a game, and they now what the financial institutions were able to do, and were able to do with this quantitative easing, is essentially create monopoly money. These mortgage-backed securities are monopoly money, and they were able to get the Federal Reserve to exchange that with them for real money. So there's a lot of this turning of fake money into real money. Cryptocurrency is one of those, but it also happens at the financial capitalism in general.
Right. So a couple of really good questions in the chat. Um, Leah Boggs had asked a little earlier, so how is money created? Is it just printed? The United States, is it just printed?
Well, it used to be printed, but now it's just debited and credited into bank accounts. I mean, it used to be printed, it, so when it was printed, you used to see armored cars driving up the street, taking money from
Right.
this place going down to the
Hmm.
Fed or from the Federal Reserve back. You see that very infrequently now. It's just a matter of going onto a computer and adding $1,000 into your account or taking $1,000 out. So money is more and more digital in that sense, but that money is not cryptocurrency. It is a computer representation of real things, of real
Mm.
people buying and selling real stuff. You
Okay.
know,
Okay.
and so how is money created? By strokes on the keyboard,
And
and
so
that might make people a little nervous as to, is it really money? But it's really money because you can go down to the store and buy a loaf of bread with it.
right, right.
Mhm.
And so then the answer, so then the question becomes, because this is the argument that I hear from people who are proponents of cryptocurrency, because money is just strokes on a keyboard,
Uh-huh.
anybody can create money. But if the people who are creating money are creating these keyboard strokes that nobody really recognizes, and that nobody has any relationship or value with the keystrokes they're creating,
Mhm.
then that money is worthless. And now it makes sense. Now it makes a little bit more sense to me. So,
Here's another analogy that I've thought about for a while,
mhm,
that in a different context, but I think it applies here. Let's say some celebrity, and I'm not picking on Oprah Winfrey because, but except she's wealthy. So the idea is Oprah Winfrey is driving down the streets of Chicago in her limousine. She's driving, and she sees this starving artist on the corner selling his paintings for $25 each. And she stops and she buys these paintings, paying $25, takes them to her home, puts them on the wall, and has an art show. And people come in to see the art that Oprah purchased.
mhm.
And the art may or may not be any good, but it's at Oprah's house. So her guests say, "Oh, that's fantastic. How much is that worth?" And Oprah Winfrey says, "Well, that's worth $25,000." Now, it's worth 25,000 because Oprah says it's worth 25,000.
Right.
And not only that, Oprah can go to an insurance company and insure those paintings for $25,000 each, and then take that insurance contract to a bank and borrow $25,000 per painting that she paid $25 for. That's $25 worth of art. So cryptocurrency is like that. It is worth what it's worth because people say it's worth what it's worth.
It sounds like you just described Oprah Winfrey's book club, honestly. And I
I
see
wasn't
Leah said
picking
the
on
same
her,
thing in
but
the chat. We're all on the same.
exactly, exactly, yes. I hadn't thought of it that way, but that's exactly what it is. Yes.
Okay, so one last question. I think we got to go. Um, so when we understand now currency, that cryptocurrency is a Ponzi scheme, we understand MMT a little better, and sovereign and sovereign nations being able to create their own currency. What does this say about what Muammar Gaddafi was trying to do in Libya,
Yeah.
with creating a an African currency not pegged to the US dollar or the
Right.
European euro, but
Mm.
backed by African gold, Libyan gold in particular? What
Yeah.
is how does our understanding of money and finance now frame what Gaddafi was trying to do in Libya and what
Mhm.
happened to Libya and
Well,
Gaddafi?
that certainly was what Gaddafi was wanting to do in creating an African Union currency. Was a major challenge to the dollar regime, right? The dollar euro regime. We're seeing that play out now with Russia and China in terms of the de-dollarization and their movement to their own trading system, using their own currency and getting away from the dollar. The petrodollar is now emerging into the petro-ruble and the petro-yuan, and the petrodollar is an entity tied to oil, tied to the dollar. There is some asset there, and so as Russia and China and other countries that are wanting to trade with them go with another currency, that creates a split in power in terms of the world. What Muammar Gaddafi wanting to do that with the European Union would mean that Senegal and other countries that were tied to the French or to the English pound and so forth, they now become tied to their own internal currency. The one thing I would say would have been a mistake, though, is to tie that to gold.
Mm.
Because there's only so much gold.
Mm.
And people who think that money on a gold standard establishes the stability of the money don't think about what happens when you have all the money that the gold allows you to produce, and you need more money. You then have to increase the value of the money because you can't increase the amount of your gold.
Wow.
It would have been it would be better if you say, we're not on the gold standard. We create an African money because we can create African money. Anyone can create money. And so the African nation, the African community, the continent and the nations could have created a currency not backed by anything except the resources of Africa. Now, gold is part of that, but those resources are not like gold sitting in a vault. Those resources are the ability to build things. Right, to grow food and to build homes and other kind of things. That's the only use of money that actually spurs development.
Wow, I really, really loved tonight's show. Covered so much, and I think we got a little bit of a hint, a little bit of a peek at the kind of organizing we need to do around finance in order to truly be free. But we're going to dig more into that next month with Dr. Linwood Tauheed on Blackonomically Speaking. Thank you so much, Doctor. Appreciate you. And we're going to get out of here so you can get ready to enjoy the Black Myths podcast. We'll see you all later. Peace, land, and bread, folks. Love you to death. Take care. Be good to each other and be very, very good to yourselves. Peace.
Thank you.
Hey, they are out here throwing up the peace sign like they won something. Yep. I don't understand what they think they want.
I need to revise. I did see white people this happy. I gave the example of America and the Allies' defeat over Nazi Germany. But I haven't seen this many white people happy. There was a couple periods in history. One was when Nutella was introduced. And I mean, I haven't seen that many white people happy since Nutella was introduced and marketed and stuff. Because white people love Nutella.
They booked the surgery just to pull me out of the basement. Right back where I started, nothing to show for a facelift. Got pushed playing Walter White and Davis, never felt so dangerous. The type of power they can't quantify. And name the best from my region, you gotta utter mine. Think of who really putting on, you never come to mind. Rapping like your Spotify, tap you rappers compromise. Yeah, no need to panic, just paint the canvas. If you can feel the static, you're too close, find your balance. Embed the revolution for their prohibition bandwidth. Blood trickle from the leaders he was planning. I had them all online before I dial up. How they claiming they on top when I'm a mile up. I had them all online before I dial up. How they claiming they on top when I'm a mile up. Boy, that flight to Amsterdam. When my accountant and minus my family found out too and didn't like it. You're not in this alone. What Dale said and I thought he was biased. Then I got a Venmo that said copy the finest. Before my foolishness settled in. Recorded the whole tape before we got to Berlin. This close to giving up, but now never again. Don't overlook the work and come expecting to win. In the end, my word, never put nothing over the squad. Got it right up under their nose and try the facade. Off the cliff with broken wings, I'm aware of the odds. Enough faith for us all, I'm the one for the job. Most days, catching sun rays, baby, look like the front page. Overthinking what they might say, have it your way. Yeah, the biggest threat is something they never seen. Dial it up, patch me into the screen. I had them all line before I dial up. How they claiming they on top and I'm a mile up. I had them all line before I dial up. How they claiming they on top and I'm a mile up.